Welcome, everybody. I think it's fair to say there's never been an acting star like Jane Fonda. She began her career in the end days of old Hollywood, herself the child of Henry Fonda, but has been one of the brightest flames of the new kind of filmmaking and acting that has transformed cinema. She won many awards, including 2 Oscars out of 7 nominations for her screen performances, tackling everything from comedies to political conspiracy, taking inspiration from the real events of the world around her, whether it was the treatment of Vietnam War vets or enduring discrimination against women in the workplace. But Ms. Fonda has also been an international political activist for much of her life, embracing the campaigns for civil rights, for worker rights, most famously and controversially to stop the American war in Vietnam. She's going back to be campaigning ahead of the midterms. She was targeted by the FBI and the White House for illegal surveillance. She's confronted hate campaigns. She's shown a fearlessness of being that dangerous thing, a successful woman with political opinions. She's a multilingual thinker who lived in France and studied the complex politics of 1968. She's been a hugely successful businesswoman in her own right, pioneering the home video best-selling Jane Fonda's Workout and that whole industry. And crucially, she's been honest about exploitative relationships with men, about eating disorders, about her anxieties and experiences, about parenting and her own parents. And through all these decades, she's kept making exciting, entertaining, provocative film and television. A new documentary looks at her life in 5 acts. But here at the BFI, we're going to attempt it in 6 clips and a conversation. Please welcome our first lady of film, Ms. Jane Fonda.
I couldn't hear what you said, but I think it made me feel tired.
You're still busy. We have about an hour and sort of 10 minutes, so we're going to try and get some questions in at the end, so keep some good questions. Can I ask, when you started out, what kind of a Hollywood was it that you were getting your first parts in?
It was a Hollywood where the major studios ruled. The big movie moguls like David Cohen and Jack Warner and, you know, the people who ran the big studios from the beginning were still in place. And I was under contract to Warner Brothers and then to Columbia. I was a contract player, and that was that.
Well, early on, as well as traditional kind of girlfriend parts, like Tall Story with Anthony Perkins, you showed remarkable power in Edward Dmytryk's Walk on the Wild Side. Lawrence Harvey, strangely cast, is the innocent Southerner trying to find his lost love in New Orleans. Slight spoilers, she's in a bordello run by Barbara Stanwyck. And you're the wild runaway from a children's home trying to steal and cheat your way. And you absolutely steal the film. This is 1962. Here you are planning a bit of theft from the kind lady who runs a diner. It's a remarkable and strange film, and you absolutely sparkle in it. How did you throw yourself into a role like that? So young.
I wasn't that young.
How old were you?
I don't remember.
62.
I think I was about maybe 23, something like that. Seems young, yeah. How did I throw myself into it? I'd made one movie before, which was Tall Story, and it was a terrible experience. And I hated playing the nice girl next door. And so I got a chance to play a hooker. And so I really wanted to sink my teeth into it. And besides, Barbara Stanwyck was in the movie, so I didn't want to disappoint her.
You did disappoint her.
No.
And was this already the influence of the Strasberg method acting?
I don't know.
Because you did take lessons.
I've studied with Lee Strasberg for a while, yeah. It was partly, I guess, the techniques that I learned with Lee Strasberg. Yeah.
And you mentioned how you hated that experience in Tall Story. The director, Joshua Logan, said something absolutely shocking to you about your appearance. Do you remember?
Well, he told me that my face was so fat that I should have my teeth taken out back here.
And your jaw broken.
And my jaw broken.
Reset.
Yeah. You know, didn't exactly make a girl feel good, you know what I mean?
And I just think, you also have that additional burden of knowing that your father was, a famous actor. So when you go off into taking the next role, do you remember how far you were trying to choose what to take and what not to take?
I was grateful anybody offered me a job. And actually, my first movie experience was so distasteful that I determined that I never would be in Hollywood again. I would just do theater. But then I was under contract to Josh Logan, and he tried to sell me to Ray Stark, and I didn't want to be sold. And so I had to work to buy back my contract. And that when I thought, well, that's worth doing, both to get money to buy myself freedom, but also to play that kind of a character was fun.
And you weren't afraid of playing a character like that?
Afraid? No, those are the fun characters to play. No.
Not everyone felt that way at the time, did they? And you had this run of really warm-hearted comedies in the mid-'60s. There's Sunday in New York. There's Cat Ballou, the kind of wonderful Western.
That was a good one.
Tell me about the joy of making that, because it does look like it was fun.
Well, it was. It was fun. It was done very quickly with almost no money. Lee Marvin leaned over to me once during rehearsal and said, the only reason we're in there is because we're under contract at Columbia and they can pay us nothing. And literally, we didn't do a second take unless the camera broke or something like that. It was very quickly shot. In fact, my tooth got knocked out. I had no tooth for a while, and I still had to go to work. They just shot me from the side or from behind. I mean, it was. But Lee Marvin was a fantastic person. I really, really liked him. He was extremely drunk all the time. I mean, a lot, but he was great. Because the movie was so low budget, they made us work very long hours, and like every day, very long hours. And he took me aside one day and he said, "Listen, Jane, we're the stars of this movie. If we let them do this to us, it's the working guys that suffer," and they were all guys on the crew at the time. We have to stand up to them because they can't. So he taught me solidarity, worker solidarity. It was great. He was a progressive guy, a good-thinking guy.
Can I ask what knocked your tooth out? Or who?
Well, I'd had a few drinks, and I lived at the beach, and there was a glass door, and I thought it was open.
That old story. There's a real slapstick art you have. I think people don't always realize it until they see your comedies, but you have a natural ability with slapstick, and I'm thinking as well of Barefoot in the Park with Robert Redford.
That's Neil Simon.
But that's not just the writing, it's your performance. And we should say, for those who haven't seen, you're the kind of upbeat wife, and Robert Redford is the uptight lawyer who's frustrated by it.
Kind of like it is.
What has it been like working with him? What was it like on that first one?
Well, I did 4 movies with him, and the first 3 I was in love with. I was always married, but I was in love with him each time, so that, he was 2 hours late every day, but I was so gaga that it didn't matter. And he wouldn't speak to me sometimes. He's very moody, and so I would just suffer a lot. And, I always thought it was my fault. But a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, I made my last movie with him, and I realized I've finally grown up. Because I got really angry when he was 2 hours late every day and didn't know his lines. And when he was in a bad mood and didn't talk to me, I knew it had nothing to do with me. It was his problem.
So you told him when he was 2 hours late and he didn't know his lines. How did he react?
Not good. I don't think we're going to work together again. Well, he's too old anyway.
Right. One of your most loved, I think it's fair to say, in cult films came the following year after Barefoot in the Park, 1968. It was made with your husband, Roger Vadim. It was based on a French comic strip heroine, I think people might be able to guess where this is going, who saves the galaxy, often to do with her amazing sexual powers. She can even make a blind angel fly again, as we're about to see. So,
I forgot how good looking he is.
I was going to say, have you forgotten
he's really cute.
How there's such joyous innocence about the way you play that role as well, which is part of the reason I think
that
it's so
was
loved.
really good acting. You know why?
Yes, tell us why.
Yes, because See, nobody had ever done this kind of thing without having strings attached, and you know, it was, so there was a big green screen where they projected the clouds and everything, and then there was a big pole that stuck out that screwed into a metal harness that John Philip Law had. He had this tight harness that had you could
Like a
screw him in the back,
yeah.
and I was fitted with a tight harness, and I was screwed into him. And so that when we were in the air, all of our body weight was pressed up against, in the crotch area, a metal garment, and both of us suffered hugely.
I think actually
It really hurt.
when you know it and you see the moment you're taking off, I can see a slight wince on your face.
Yes. I mean, it was hard. In the beginning, the first time we did it, because it had never been done before, the next day we went to see the rushes, and we were flying backwards. So we had to do it all over.
God. Barbarella is loved, and something I need to tell you I found out today. A friend went to see a screening and a talk after the screening at the Greenwich Observatory in London, and it was a talk given by an astronomer who said that by the 1980s, the planet science in Barbarella, including like that sort of diamond planet, was actually proved to be quite accurate and more accurate than Star Trek. So actually they predicted it better than...
What part was real? I don't know.
I think the idea that planets might be made out of solid minerals rather than just being bare rock or gas giants.
Oh, I see. So
I just thought you might like to know. You also wrote in your autobiography that, quote, with a little tweaking, Barbarella could have been a feminist movie and just as sexy. Could you share with us how?
Did I say that?
Yes, yes, you did. I've got the book in case you asked me
Well,
that.
here is this woman who comes from Earth. She's sent by the president of Earth to the evil planet to bring back the scientist. And she introduces sex, but her sex is taking a pill and then touching fingertips, and your hair stands on end. If she's really evolved, and she's coming to this not evolved planet, they're the ones that would be taking the pill and touching fingertips. She would be the one that would introduce face-to-face, clitoral, the real thing. Not the other way around.
Rule nodding.
She would introduce intimacy. The problem with the planet, the reason it's evil, is because they've lost the ability for intimacy. And she would introduce it. I pitched it to Dino one time. I said, I'm the grandmother. My idea was, I got pregnant by the blind angel. I laid an egg. And then there was this montage, and the egg hatches, and it was back in the day. It was Angelina Jolie. And I teach her, how to fly spacecraft and all kinds of things. And then she's the one that gets captured. So I have to bring a whole team of women. I'm the elder woman, the grandma. And I bring all these women, and we do introduce. I thought it was a great idea. He didn't go for it, but.
We still think it's a good idea, and maybe someone else could.
Well, he's gone, and I'm here, so we could do it.
We could totally do this. Can I ask a slightly darker question, which is you have written about how you tried to please Roger Vadim in making that film, and in general in your relationship with him. And can I ask how you look back at that film, knowing that there was that darker side of your desire to please?
Oh, I spent 10 years with Ted Turner. I've learned how to be funny. I didn't know before then, but I have a sense of humor now, so I can watch the movie and find it funny. I don't find it sexy, but I find it charming and funny.
But in terms of that relationship,
I don't remember
with
the bad stuff.
You don't?
No.
You make a big change of direction after making Barbarella, and I think we have a still of They Shoot Horses, don't they, which is 19...
Well, it came out in 68. Can you imagine making Barbarella in 1968 and living in France? Where les événements de mai, I just came from France, so I'm wanting to talk French.
So there's amazing political upheaval.
Oh, my Lord, all over the world.
And obviously things changed for you. You had a kind of political awakening, and you start making these very dark films. This is a film that's set in the Great Depression. It's about these dance marathons where people would dance themselves, for weeks in hope of a prize. And it's a remarkable dark film. What was
It's a
changing
fabulous
for you?
film.
What was
Huh?
changing for you in your life that made you go and make this film?
Well, it's not why I went and made the film. I didn't want to do the film. The script was not very good, but Vadim being, the novel was very popular. It's a great existential novel, very popular in France. And he told me I have to do it. He said, no, this is important, you have to do it. And so I had just had a baby, and I went to California with my family, and the director, writer, whose name I won't reveal right now, got fired. And who gets hired? Sidney Pollack. Sidney Pollack. No one knew who he was, but he was fabulous. I mean, he was just such a wonder. I made other films with him, such a wonderful director. And it was a turning point. I had never made a movie that was about something, that came out at the right time and had something to say about capitalism, about greed, about the things that were wrong with American society.
And one of the cast in it, I don't know if you played the announcer. He was the actor who played the kind of grandfather of the
Gigyan?
Munsters.
Oh, Al, yeah.
Yes, he told you stories about his memories of the Depression, didn't he?
He did. He told me a lot of things. He told me about the Panthers, the Black Panthers, and how I had to find out about them and get involved. And it was a turning point kind of for me.
Another film you made, which came out the year after, is the conspiracy thriller Klute, which again we have a photograph of it. This won you your first Oscar, and it's one of Alan J. Pakula's kind of great trilogy of kind of conspiracy thrillers around that end of the Nixon era, about surveillance, about secrecy, about cover-up. And you play the prostitute Bree, who you created this really rich backstory for. I think there's a signed photo of President Kennedy, isn't there, in her apartment? And there's a remarkable scene with a John where you fake an orgasm while kind of checking your wristwatch over his shoulder. Those
Don't we all?
But those details weren't just, you use your imagination. You had spoken to women who'd worked as prostitutes.
I spent a week before we started shooting in New York with call girls and madams, very high-class call girls and prostitutes, and I would spend all day with them. I would go with when they would get their cocaine and cut their cocaine, and after-hours clubs with their jaunts, and the entire time, not one man made a move on me, didn't even wink. I was waiting for me to. I mean, why? What's the matter with me? And I realized that I really wasn't right for the part. That, they could see through me that I was basically a very straight bourgeois young thing. And I went to Alan Pakula and I said, I don't think I can do this. Let me out of my contract, and get Faye Dunaway. She can do it. And he laughed at me. And so I knew I had to do it. And then I remembered that when I was married to Roger Vadim and living in France, there was a very famous madam called Madame Claude. And I knew some of her women. That's a whole other story. But I started thinking about them. I had become friends with 3 of them at various times. Every one of them had been sexually abused as a child. And that gave me the entry into the character. Why would a woman who had a lot going for her and who there's a moment where you see that Bree Daniels is not untalented as an actor, so why would she sell her body? And I knew why then, and I could develop a character around that, yeah.
It's a remarkable performance, as we say. You won your first Oscar for it. You won your second Oscar for your performance in Coming Home in 1978, which is about a young wife who volunteers at a hospital for wounded veterans while her captain husband is serving in Vietnam. And we'll talk a bit about Vietnam and your activism shortly. But I'm interested in the fact that you were a driving force behind this film getting made. How did it come about? And then we'll see.
Well, I wanted to make a movie about Vietnam. In fact, I wanted to quit Hollywood because I wasn't getting interesting parts, and I wanted to make movies about things, that I was involved with as an activist. And there was I had a friend he was a black lawyer in Detroit, Ken Cockrell, and I had been spending time with him, and I told him I wanted to quit Hollywood, and he said, no, the movement has plenty of organizers. We don't have movie stars. You not only have to stay in your profession, but you have to pay more attention to it. You have to be very intentional. You have to create an even stronger career. So I did, I always do what the men tell me. So I did. I went back and I decided I was going to start producing my own movies, starting with a movie about Vietnam, but I didn't know exactly how to do it. And I was at a rally one day on a college campus. The war was still going on, with Ron Kovic, who, a movie was made about Ron Kovic called Born on the 4th of July, played by Tom Cruise. And he was describing how he re-enlisted 3 times going to Vietnam. He was a real believer in the war. And he was in a wheelchair, paralyzed from the neck down. And he said to the students, yeah, I may have lost my body, but I've gained my mind. Because he had come to realize that the war was a lie, that they had been tricked. And I thought, I could make a movie about that. And that's what we did.
I think we should have a look at a clip, and it's from your first proper conversation with the Jon Voight's character, inspired by Ron Kovic. And it's when you realise, you're volunteering at the hospital while your husband is away, the hospital treating vets, and you realise that you knew him a little at school. Let's have a look. It's a beautiful and moving film.
Yes, Hal Ashby directed it. He was a brilliant guy.
And there's 2 aspects that I wanted to talk about. One is the way that it really brought home how these soldiers were neglected. There are those scenes where you're walking through the hospital and volunteering, and you're seeing it, in a sense, for the first time. But the other aspect is also the kind of, when you're trying to talk to the wives about getting the newspaper to talk a bit about them, and they don't want to. That sense of, you're always kind of an activist in these films. It feels like you were definitely conscious of the message you wanted to convey to an audience.
Well, I'd spent 3 years working with veterans from Vietnam and active duty servicemen, and I had interviewed many of their wives, so I kind of knew what it was like and what the issues were for the wives. And I wanted to start off playing a woman who was a believer in the war. And this all came as a big surprise to her when she began to learn through the Jon Voight character, what was really happening. And so in the movie, my character goes through the kind of transformations that we all went through. She stopped straightening her hair. She started being, a different kind of person, which caused a lot of complications when her husband came back. Anyway, it was really, Hal Ashby was an interesting director. I don't know if he really liked people very much. He didn't talk to us. He didn't give us very much direction, but he would shoot 40 takes and print them all. And that was in the days of film, so it was really expensive, and I was one of the producers. And then, because he had started off, you see, as an editor, and so he thought like an editor, and he would take all these 50s, 60s takes, and he would go into his editing room, and like a sculptor, he would create the movie. He created the characters out of his own, what he saw. Way better than what John and I actually did, I think. And then put this music onto it, and it ended up working. It was very complicated to get done.
And there's incredible intimacy in this film. Some of it we see just there with the close-ups on faces. Some of it is, there is a very famous sex scene, which is about real intimacy, about pleasuring, and it's fascinating to see that as an important part of this picture.
Yeah, it was, and Hal Ashby and I had a big fight about that. I wanted, along with the issues for the veterans that were being raised in the movie, I wanted to raise a gender issue. I'll be perfectly blunt about this. Okay, here was my husband who had full use of his body, but he was that kind of rigid man, who believed in the war and who really couldn't loosen up, and he did not know how to please me as a woman. And here was this other man, Jon Voight's character, who couldn't move. And I thought, well, if this man because of what he has become, is able to satisfy Sally, wouldn't that be saying something interesting about masculinity? And Hal Ashby wasn't so crazy about that idea. But I thought, yeah, but I mean, the guy can't move. Well, there were a lot of real paraplegics that were around us as extras when we were shooting. And I remember there was this one really cute guy in a wheelchair and an adorable girlfriend. And, you know, she'd flop him over and sit on his back. And you could tell by the way they touched each other and everything, that they were intimate. So I asked her, I said, "Do you guys have sex?" And she told me the story. She said, "Well, you never know when it's going to happen." She specifically said, "One time we were driving past a field of daisies, and you know, when that happened, it would last for 4 hours." And the problem was that Hal Ashby heard the story, and so he wanted one of those 4-hour things to be going on, and I didn't want that to be. I wanted it to be oral sex, and we had a big fight about it, and it's ambiguous now. It's a really sexy scene, but you don't quite know.
You do.
You do.
He's definitely pleasuring you. It's
yeah,
fine.
Yeah, okay.
It's a wonderful scene. Can I take this point to then reflect slightly backwards over the years about the whole experience you had as an activist who campaigned to end the war in Vietnam? You were demonized as so-called Hanoi Jane after going to North Vietnam during the war. And again, you wrote in your autobiography, you said some veterans, to them Barbarella had become their enemy. There were politicians who wanted to put you on trial for treason. It can be hard to imagine that vitriol. How do you look back on that whole experience now?
Oh, with a lot of sadness still, because what it meant was that there were a lot of people who had been in Vietnam and some who hadn't, who never did understand the truth about the war. You know, they didn't read the Pentagon Papers, so they don't know that a whole series of administrations, Democrat and Republican, simply lied. They knew, their advisors knew we couldn't win, and they kept going because, well, what Lyndon Johnson said to his biographer, if I pull the troops out of Vietnam, Bobby Kennedy, who was running against him, will call me an unmanly man. And you know, he was afraid of premature evacuation, I think. But I mean, how many men died because our presidents were afraid of looking weak? It's disgusting. It's awful. And looking back, and even now, those who still don't understand, it's sad because, you know, I became a lightning rod, and I understand that why that happened. You have to get mad at somebody, and they can't get mad at the government. So I'm the one.
And
But, you know, that said, there are a lot of veterans who do understand and who have come to the realization.
Well, I'm fascinated that so much of your work was spent going out and meeting them and spending time with them, talking to them directly and confronting the very people who you might have been most afraid of. That seems to be an attitude that you've always adopted, to confront.
Well, I talk to people now who voted for Trump. I mean, we're not going to solve this if we don't talk to each other, right? We have to get out of our bubbles. But yeah, I was in Waterbury, Connecticut, making a film with Robert De Niro, and I was burned in effigy.
This was during Stanley and Iris.
Stanley and Iris, and so I asked somebody to arrange a meeting with the Vietnam veterans in Waterbury, and we went into the basement of the church. There were about 40 of them. And I'll never forget, I walked in and I was by myself, and I think that took them, they thought I was going to come in with bodyguards or something like that. And it was just me, and I'm sort of petite, so they were surprised and sort of taken off guard. And we sat in a circle, and I went first. I said, let's just go around and let's tell our stories. And I told them why I went, and because of the dikes, I wanted to stop the bombing of the dikes, and I cried, and I apologized, and then they all talked. And when it was over, it was about 3 or 4 hours of us doing this. Somebody came and said, you know, the press found out about this, and they're waiting outside. What should we do? And I asked the guys, I said, what should we do? We can go out the back door, or what do you want to do? And they said, ask them in. So the press came in, and they were expecting, I don't know what they were expecting, but here we were kind of hugging each other. We had been through something so profound, what I heard from these men. You know, first or second generation Polish guys who they knew that if they served in the military, they'd become American, you know, and without exception, they all blamed themselves for the loss of the war. And, you know, I was saying to them, no, you don't understand, it had nothing to do with you. We never fielded a better army. You did just what you were told to do. It wasn't your fault. You know, the French didn't win, and they were, anyway. It was very weird. It was an incredible experience. Somebody wrote a play about it, in fact. And there was a guy that came in with it was a Delta death card. It was an ace of spades. And he came in wanting to throw it at my feet and scare me. And instead he tore it up and threw it in the garbage. And I'm still in contact with him. So, you know, when we can talk to each other and hear each other as humans, things turn out okay. Yeah.
But it's important to say that this was the 1980s, the late 1980s, wasn't it, when this happened? It was a long time after the war had ended, and that there was still vitriol and hatred being stirred up and ongoing.
You know, we had never lost a war, and it was so close to the surface in these men. It defined their lives. And this guilt that they carried, and this feeling that everybody hated them, and you know, it was very difficult for them. And you know, so the pain, the anger, the hatred was very close to the surface, and I think in some small way we helped to smooth it out a little bit. Yeah.
And, you know, all this time, you were often driving across America, you were meeting activists. You know, when you weren't meeting veterans, you were talking firsthand always to people about workers' rights, about civil rights. And I was really struck by the fact that you were stopped and searched regularly. You were followed by the FBI as part of a kind of Group 1 list of top secret targets. And there was a special operation called COINTELPRO that you were a target of. And the words they used on your file were an alleged subversive, an anarchist. The CIA were opening your mail. And you often talk about yourself as, you saw yourself as the Lone Ranger. You were kind of going to ride on through it all. Can you give a sense of mentally how you were coping at the time? You know,
well, by then I wasn't a Lone Ranger. By then I was part of an organization. And so you never want to be alone. You know, you never want to do anything, you know, as an individual. You want to do it within an organization. Because who knows if you're right or wrong? You know, you want people to talk about things collectively, and I was surrounded by friends. I knew what was in my heart. I knew who I was. I knew that I wasn't a traitor, and that I didn't intend to do anything that was against the soldiers. And, you know, I cared about the soldiers. And so you just go on. And frankly, the more they very obviously tried to scare me and everything like that, you know, I'd come home and all the drawers in our house would be torn out and everything like that. You know, the more I just would dig my heels in.
You sued the Nixon administration,
I
didn't
did,
you?
and I won, yeah. The ACLU, yay, ACLU. American Civil Liberties Union.
But I think, wasn't it the first time the CIA ever admitted that they had been kind of going through the mail of a U.S. citizen? They admitted
and went into my bank. They got the bank to turn over, you know, that had never happened before.
Amazing. And what's really interesting is all the way through this period, you're winning awards, you're making big box office films.
Not big box office films.
No? With films like The China Syndrome, not significant?
Well, that was quite a bit longer, and the reason the China Syndrome made money was because 2 weeks after it opened, 3 Mile Island happened.
I should say it's a
film
film about
wanted to
nuclear
know
disaster.
what's going on, so they went to see the film, and the film explained what a meltdown would mean.
In a nuclear reactor. But I'm fascinated by all these films you're making through the 70s. They all seem to have a political connection, and they're all exciting, entertaining films as well.
Well, if you want to say something important about an issue, you have to figure out what is the style? You know, like Coming Home was kind of a sexy love story. China Syndrome was a suspense. 9 to 5 was a comedy. You know,
Well,
Preston Sturgis was the most brilliant person who knew how to deliver a message in a way that was very popular and entertaining.
so those films like Sullivan's Travels and
Yes.
yeah, so that you were kind of inspired by that
Yes.
use of
Yes.
mainstream
Yes.
entertainment. Well, it does lead very nicely onto the film 9 to 5, which was a big box office smash. It's about 3 white-collar women imagining murdering their sexist boss. I'm not going to say anything. But I gather it grew out of crowdsourcing from your activism, stories that came to you from
Well,
your friends.
during the anti-war movement, I became friends with a woman named Karen Nussbaum, who her day job was organizing women office workers, and she would tell me stories. And I said, I got to make a movie about this. And it started off being a kind of dark comedy. And then one day, I didn't really know Lily. I'd never seen Lily Tomlin. I went to her one-woman show, and I fell in love. I was just stunned by her brilliance. And I said to myself, I don't want to make a movie about secretaries unless Lily Tomlin is in it. And as this is true, as I was driving home from the theater, I turned on the radio, and Dolly Parton was singing Two Doors Down, and the hair stood up on the back of my neck. And I thought, oh my goodness, she's never been in a movie, but if Dolly was in a movie in a match, you can't even see her hands, you know, and she's trying to type with her big breasts and her long fingernails, and people are going to want to see Dolly Parton in a movie as a secretary. This is perfect. But it took me a year to convince them. But eventually I did, and we rewrote the script. Colin Higgins wrote and directed it, and I arranged there was a National Association of Women Office Workers, 9 to 5, the National Association, and they were based in Cleveland. And I called up and I said, look, I'm coming with the writer-director, and would you gather together 30 or 40 women from different companies, banks and insurance companies, so that he can ask them all questions? So they sat in a circle and they all went around and told their stories, and then, this is why he was a genius, he said, do you ever fantasize what you'd like to do to your boss? Oh, I mean, we couldn't use a lot of words. Oh my God. But that formed the basis of, you know, of the movie. It was just genius.
Well, we're going to have a look at a clip now and say
good.
you casting these 2 people, even though you're the one with 2 Oscars, you give yourself the kind of relatively modest part. You're the
Well, I had to get them in the movie.
So you're the new divorcee who's forced back to work after her husband has gone off with his secretary. And Lily Tomlin has introduced you to the boss who is promoted over her. And you're about to meet his new secretary. I chose that clip because what I loved was how earlier in the film you show how women are often set against each other and divided against each other until they learn how to organise. And it had a remarkable reaction from audiences at the time it came out.
It was a huge hit, and it made a big difference for women office workers. 9 to 5, the Association of Women Office Workers became District 9 to 5, part of SEIU, the Public Service Employees Union. Yeah, and of course the song became the anthem for women office workers. It made a big difference. They didn't anymore need to explain what they were up against. They just had to figure out how to solve it.
Yeah, we haven't quite done
Still
that
to
yet.
be done, by the way.
I think we have to say there's been at least one mean-spirited review in a British paper by a man who complained that he doesn't think 9 to 5 is a feminist film because of what it plays for laughs. What would you say?
You mean if it had been serious, it would have been a feminist movie?
Well, I think it's interesting that it's an entertaining film, even just the little joke about her not being able to type. I mean, as I say, I think it's a mean-spirited way to look at it now. But it is interesting, isn't it? People sometimes have very narrow views about what they think can be feminist.
You think?
Yeah, maybe.
No kidding.
You've not heard any of this.
No, I've never heard that before.
I mean, certainly in Britain, I don't know where you are, there's been a lot about the pay gap in particular, including at the BBC. And it's interesting in a way that although this film was made in 1980, although we don't have typing pools in the same way now, every single issue in it, sexual harassment, men being promoted over women, the pay gap, none of them have been solved. And I don't know whether you would be, the Jane Fonda who made 9 to 5 in 1980 would be horrified that we don't seem to have got as far as you'd think.
We've come a little way, but in some ways for office workers it's worse now. Here's why. A lot of them aren't even hired by Mr. Hart and the company. They're hired by another company and then subcontracted to this company, so that if there's wage theft or a woman is fired because she's pregnant or there's sexual harassment, where does she go? She doesn't get benefits or anything, you know, and there's no place to go to get redress of grievances. So it's, plus, now it's digital. They give you your computer and your phone, so they know your password, so they know everything you do, everybody you talk to. It's very easy now to spy on people. Things are really bad, and the pay is so low that, you know, I think if we did it exactly like this again, we would probably be working 2 or 3 jobs and still not being able to pay the rent. That's the reality for working people in the United States today.
I think here too we call it the kind of gig economy, where people
the gig economy, that's right. Yeah,
no contract. I want to move on to on Golden Pond, which is a 1985. It's a special moment in your career. You played a daughter trying to reconcile with a father who has always been aloof and cold. Henry Fonda played your father, and you got to work with Katharine Hepburn as your mother. And I've chosen a clip with her because I think there's interesting stories about working with her. They are looking after your son over the summer while you're away, and in this scene you have come back unexpectedly. It's a beautiful film. It won many awards. You were all nominated. You didn't win the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress, but both Katharine Hepburn and...
Can I tell you what she said to me?
Yeah,
see, I produced the movie for my father, and we were all nominated, and she won and he won, and I called her the next day to congratulate her. She said, "You'll never catch me now."
And this was because, tell us what that meant.
Well, I had won 2 and she'd won 3. So if she didn't win and I did, we'd be tied at 3. But if she won and I didn't, she'd have 4 and I'd have 2. I'd never catch up. She was right.
But what makes that a kind of extra, I think, basically depressing in a way, is that you had got to know her well over the shoot. She was very kind of distant
She
with
was
you
prickly
at the start.
and very competitive in a way that my generation didn't understand. It was...
You weren't supposed to have children if you wanted a career as an actor.
She was angry that I was married and had children and a dog, and, you know, she was a character. But, and the first thing she ever said to me was, "I don't like you." Because she and my dad had never met, and so they met because they were going to be shooting, and I wasn't there because I was with Dolly Parton, who, in a way, for thanking me for hiring her for 9 to 5, she did something very special for me down south. And so I wasn't there, and that was, Katherine thought that meant I didn't respect her. So from then on, I had to do everything I could to show her that I respected her. And you know, the same day that she told me she didn't like me, then she said, "Are you going to do the backflip?" And I had no intention of doing the backflip.
So there's this big thing at the moment about, you know, you finally be able to do a backflip into the lake that you couldn't do as a child.
I hate cold water. I don't like going over backwards, and I certainly don't know how to do a backflip, so I had someone already in training to do it. And she asked me that, and I flashed on her doing the backflip in Philadelphia Story. And I said, "No, of course I'm going to do the backflip." And I spent a month trying to learn, first on a mattress with a pulley, and it was very difficult. And then I graduated to the float where eventually the scene was shot. Over and over and over again, I would try to do it with my coach. And then eventually I managed to go all the way around. That day, I was crawling up on the beach. I was covered with bruises, and out of the bushes comes Katharine Hepburn. She'd been hiding in the bushes watching me. And she came up to me and she said, "You've taught me to respect you, Jane. You've stood up to your fears. There is nothing more important. If you don't stand up to your fears, you'll become soggy." Thank you, God. I was so grateful she didn't think I was soggy.
This was a big mantra, never be soggy.
Never be soggy. And then the big scene I had with my dad, I had to say things to him that I had never said in life, and the film was very much close to the way it really was in our life. He thought I was fat, and he, just all the things. I don't know. The guy that wrote it didn't even know that my father and I had a relationship that was very much like that. And so when the time came for me to shoot my part of the scene, I was drier than a witch's tit, I tell you. I could not call up any emotion whatsoever because it was too close, I guess. I was scared to death. And I turned my back to the camera. I was standing in the water, and I said to Mark Rydell, the director, I'll prepare, and then I'll turn around, and then you can roll the cameras. And I mean, I'm there, and I'm praying to Lee Strasberg, please send me a sign, tell me what'll I do. And I looked, and there was Katharine Hepburn in the bushes again. Nobody could see her but me. And she raised her fists. You can do it, Jane. You can do it, Jane. And it was older actress to younger actress. It was mother to daughter. And she, with her fists and her eyes, she willed me into the scene.
Beautiful.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah.
There's one more thing she said to you I wanted to ask about. You talked about that very intense scene at the end with your father, where you deliberately sit there and you do all the reverse shots, which actors don't have to do. The camera's on him, not you. And you wait until the last take to reach out and touch his arm.
That always, you had to rehearse a lot, and then you had to do it exactly the way you rehearsed. And he was scared of emotion, which is strange, being an actor and everything, but he didn't like emotion. And but the scene was so important to me. I wanted him to do something unexpected. So when I thought it was his last close-up, and I say to him, I want to be your friend, and he said, I just thought we didn't like each other, and I reach out, and I did something that I hadn't done in rehearsal, and I touched his arm. And it's like the whole world just stopped for a second, and then he went like this. But I saw the tears in his eyes. It meant the world to me. I moved him, yeah, but he didn't want anybody to see it.
But then when it was time for your reverses?
Well, that was then, it was Hepburn was there.
But he didn't do them for you, and after you'd done them for him, and Katharine Hepburn said something to you about...
Oh, that was a different scene. That was when... Scene. Right, we're in the house, and the two of them, Katharine and my dad, were playing Parcheesi, and he says something nasty about why I don't play Parcheesi, and I say something. It's a very sharp exchange between the two of us, and we shot my close-up first, and there was so much light on me that I couldn't see his eyes, so I asked the cinematographer to dim the light a little bit so I could see his eyes. We did that part, and then we turned around, and it was his close-up. And before we shot, I said, is it okay, Dad? Can you see my eyes? He said, I don't need to see your eyes. I'm not that kind of actor. And then this thing happened that's not uncommon for actors. It's really weird. Half of my brain wanted to commit suicide, basically. I mean, I just felt awful. I'm not that kind of actor. I wanted to die. And then the other part of my brain said, yes, this is exactly what Chelsea should be feeling right now. Totally diminished. This is just perfect. But I was very, very, very hurt. And it was the end of the day, and everybody was wrapping to go home, and I was sitting on the couch, and Katharine Hepburn sat next to me. She put her arm around me. Jane. He didn't know he hurt you. He's just like Spence. Spence used to send me away. He didn't even want me around for the close-ups.
This is Spencer Tracy, her partner.
Spencer Tracy, yeah. It was so important to me. I had a witness. She saw what happened and she understood. Oh my God, it meant so much to me. She was so she was so complicated and interesting. I think that everything she did was to make sure that when she died, I'd talk about her a lot. I really think so. Yeah. You know, in the very, very beginning of the movie, I was fixing my hair before we started shooting. There was a mirror on the set, and I was fixing my hair. She came up behind me, and she reached around, and she went like this, "Jane, what do you think about this? This is your box," meaning, you know, how you present yourself to the world. "What do you think about this?" I didn't even know what she meant. What do I think about how I present to the world? I always thought it was a bad thing to be self-conscious. But over the years, it's haunted me. And I've come to the realization that being conscious of how you present to the world is not a bad thing at all. You need to know that. But I didn't understand it then, you know? So she was, you know, she was a real, when you talk about elders, she was a quintessential elder who took it on her shoulders to teach and mentor. Michael Jackson, the singer, was a friend of mine, and he had just made The Whiz, and he was interested in learning about movie acting, and he asked if he could come and stay with me and watch the shooting between Dad and Katherine. And at first, Katherine didn't know who he was, and she didn't want, she was such a snob, oh my Lord.
Surely
He's black. But then she found out he was famous. And so she not only welcomed him, but I would bring him to the set when I wasn't working, and she would, between takes, she would bring a chair over and have him sit next to her, and she would tell him stories. And embedded in every story was a lesson. For example, she talked to him about seeing Lorette Taylor when she was a young girl in Glass Menagerie. And she described the magic, the raw presence of this brilliant, probably the most brilliant theater actress ever in America. And then she talked about 10 or 15, 20 years later, seeing Lorette Taylor in the play again, and the magic was gone. And because she said she wasn't hungry anymore, you know? She wasn't hungry and raw. What a great thing to say to a young Michael Jackson who was on the cusp of Thriller, and, you know, and you gotta stay hungry. You gotta stay raw. You gotta be willing to go deep, dig deep. And that's just one example. And I don't know whatever happened to the tapes. I mean, they would be really valuable now. But she did that for an entire week. She would just sit him down and tell him stories that had lessons in them. Isn't that great?
That's great. I want to fit in one more clip before we open up to questions, which is Monster-in-Law, which is your comeback film in 2005. And what's interesting is that, you know, superficially it's like a film about a monstrous older woman, but as the TV news anchor determined Jennifer Lopez isn't good enough for your son, actually we see the backstory. Early on we see that your character gets sacked for being too old, and here you are still in shock doing your last interview with a young pop star.
Yeah, I remember that scene. It's a good
It's in the right clip to end on. The Roe versus Wade reference, the unleashing of female anger. It feels, although it's made in 2005, it feels like a moment of today. Tell me about why you came back with that film and the fact that it's written that way.
I had left the business. I married Ted Turner. I had no intention of ever acting again. I didn't miss it at all. And then 10 years with Ted, and then I wrote my memoir. And by the time I finished writing my memoir, I was a different person, and I thought I could find joy in acting again. And then the script came along, and I've never thought strategically about my career in my life, but I thought, aha, this is very interesting because my part is the better part. People are going to come to see Jennifer Lopez, but they're going to find Jane Fonda or re-find Jane Fonda. And that's exactly what happened. It became a huge success. And very often when I see a group of young women, especially Latinas, walking towards me and they recognize me and they get excited, forget Coming Home and Clute and Julia and everything. It's all, I know what they're going to say. Oh, Monster-in-Law. I've seen it 15 times. That's my favorite movie of all. You know, it's great. It's great.
Let's take some questions. Let's keep them nice and short so we can get as many in as we can. I'll take one here. How many mics have we got? We've got two. So one here, and can we take the one down the far right there?
The women's movement was a distraction. That was to start with. And then I began to meet feminists, most particularly Gloria Steinem, and I began to read books, and I began to understand intellectually what feminism was, and I put feminism into my movies, but I didn't embody feminism. You can't embody feminism if you're in marriages that are not authentic. You just can't. And so it took me into my 60s to really, and I know exactly when it happened. One of my best friends is Eve Ensler, who wrote the Vagina Monologues, and I was watching her in her last performance where she played all of the characters in the Vagina Monologues, and it was while I was laughing that my feminism went from my head into my body. I can't explain it, but I became an embodied feminist. Yeah.
Right, more questions.
When I left the business in 1990, it was still, you could make movies like Coming Home and 9 to 5 and China Syndrome at a major studio. That's not true anymore, except very, very, very rarely do you make those kind of movies at studios. Because of globalization, the major studios, to make a lot of money, have to do movies that will appeal in China and India and France and all over the world. And that usually means that a certain kind of man has to be in the lead, and there has to be a lot of action and a lot of special effects, because that plays across cultures. You know, character-driven stories and comedies don't necessarily play across cultures. They're called tentpole movies. And, you know, that kind of leaves out old women, kind of leaves out a certain kind of movie that a lot of us prefer. So we have to try to scrounge around and get funding for independent films. But what has happened that didn't exist before was television has bloomed. The good writers, a lot of good directors, a lot of women directors have moved to television. And I'm very grateful for that, because having a small, well, now the screens are pretty big for television, but it's more forgiving for older people. And you can do things on television that you never could do before, and you can get really good writers. And it's just fascinating what television has become.
Which is the Grace and Frankie, which I didn't mention, which is your comedy show with Lily
Right.
Tomlin.
And the other thing that's changed is when I came back after 15 years to make Monster-in-Law, and I remember the very first take, and Jennifer Lopez was there, and I said, where's the director? And she said, well, he's in Video Village. I didn't even know what she was talking about. I didn't realize that we'd gone from having film in the camera and the director standing next to the camera to he's around the corner. It's always he, or too much he. Not so much now. It'll change. Around the corner, under a tent, looking at a video of what you're doing. And that takes some getting used to. That was different. Also, you know, when I left, we had Klieg lights, these huge, lighting was very different because you were using film. I remember one of the first close-ups I did in Monster-in-Law. The light was it was that long. It was a fluorescent tube behind a vase of flowers. That was my light. You know, it was, wow, it's very different. Andy was my friend. Andy did portraits of me, which I asked him to do so that I could sell to raise money for my husband's political campaigns, but I still have 10 of them. And they're all hanging in my apartment. Yeah, Andy was a friend, not very, very close friend, not like he was with, Viva and others, but yeah, I knew those folks, yeah.
Candy Darling into the film,
Yeah.
Jude?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Candy Darling had a crush on my husband at the time, Roger Vadim. I had never been a regular on a TV series. It's a different animal. I learned very quickly. I had all kinds of ideas in the beginning, and then I realized I don't know what I'm talking about. It's just very different. And we have a fantastic room of writers. Our lead person who came up with the whole idea and is the lead writer is a woman, Marta Kaufman. She's the co-creator of Friends. And I've learned to just keep my mouth shut and you know, sometimes, because in the beginning, like about a month before we start shooting, the writers are already in the writer's room now for the end of January when we start shooting 6th season. And in about a month, Marta will call me and Lily in, and she will talk about the arc of the season. And sometimes if we don't agree, like a couple of years ago, the season ended with Lily and me getting married. We didn't think so, no. So we nixed that, but you know, we have a little input. For example, this is really superficial. In fact, I'm not going to go into it. I'm not going to take the time. But
No.
we just get along really, really well. I love Lily. We're best friends, and her partner of 46 years, Jane, the genius Jane Wagner. She's J1 and I'm J2. And we laugh a lot, especially at 2 in the morning when we've been working for 16 hours. We get kind of giddy and we laugh, and it's a lot of fun. I just love her. She just has a natural funny bone.
Excellent.
Well, it remains to be seen. It's time, you know, Me Too is the beginning of the movement when survivors came forward and told their stories. And because they were white and famous, and because the perpetrators were men and they were famous, people paid attention and they were believed. African American women have been telling stories like this for a long time, Anita Hill being the most famous of them, and people didn't believe, and it didn't have traction. So it's sad that it had to be that. It had to be white women in Hollywood. But Time's Up is now what do we do about it? And at the very beginning of our discussing strategy for Time's Up, we received a letter from the head of the Alliance of Women Farm Workers, 700,000 of them in the United States, a Dear Sisters letter that was published in the New York Times saying, we understand, we stand with you, we understand what you're going through, we experience it every day in the fields. And it really made us sit up and think about this and realize that if we're going to matter, if we're going to work, if it's going to succeed, we have to stand at the margins with other women on factory floors, in fields, in offices, in hotels, the women who care for the elderly, the women who take care of our homes, who are so vulnerable, who don't have voices like women in Hollywood do, who are so vulnerable to losing their job if they speak up. And we have to stand with them in solidarity. We have to go to Washington with them and lobby for the changes that they need to have happen. And that's what we're doing. And I think it has given real meaning to the notion of intersectionality. And I don't think this is going to go away. I think this has really made a difference for us internally. So we're not going to stop fighting. Structural changes are very hard. What it means, for one thing, is doing away with arbitration, forced arbitration, doing away with the consent, what are they called? Non-disclosure agreements, where you're scared you'll be sued if you talk about what's really going on. We have to get rid of those, and we have to get more women in positions of power. And, I work very closely, since Trump was elected, with an organization called ROC, Restaurant Opportunity Centers United. It's restaurant workers. 13 million of them in the United States. 80% of them are women, often single mothers. The federal mandated salary for a tipped worker is $2.13 an hour. I mean, you don't live on $2.13 an hour. It all goes to taxes. So you're completely dependent on tips, which means that whatever the man does to you, the customer does to you. I mean, I know a woman, somebody bit her breast. She's suffering from PTSD. If they grab your butt, if they say inappropriate things, you have to smile and put up with it, or you literally will not be able to feed your children and pay your rent. There are 7 states in the United States that have a fair wage, where tipped workers earn the same minimum wage other workers do, plus tips, and in those 7 states, sexual harassment was cut in half. And that proof to me, that is concrete proof, that when there is pay equity and when women have more financial power, we don't put up with it. And it just doesn't happen in the same way.
Thank you.
It's why on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I'm going to be in Michigan with Taraji P. Henson, Cookie in Empire, and Patrisse Cullors, the co-founder of Black Lives Matter. And we're going to be traveling all over Michigan. We spent 2 years fundraising and gathering 400,000 signatures to get one fair wage on the ballot in Michigan. And the very right-wing Tea Party state legislature was so scared that it would motivate people to go to the polls to vote themselves a raise that they passed it. They hate it, but they passed it to get it off the ballot, making it very clear that after the election they're going to gut it. So we have to fight to prevent that from happening. Yeah. How do I feel when acting on stage as opposed to on camera? It's a different animal, and I did 5 plays on Broadway when I was just starting out. I did not enjoy them. And when I turned 70, I thought, I want to do a play, and I got a script called 33 Variations. It was a wonderful play, written and directed by Moises Kaufman, with a terrific part for me, and I really, really enjoyed doing it. I wanted to do it because it was on my bucket list. My dad always liked theater more, and I wanted to find out what it was. And there's just something about being in front of a live audience that's very exciting and special. It's an interesting experience because it takes so much out of you, 8 performances, a week, twice on Saturday and Wednesday, that every nook and cranny of your psyche is filled with this. You have to totally not think of or do anything else but focus on it. I love that. I just love that. But I don't think I'll do it again. Here's why. Because at least in New York, you have to be rich to go to the theater. And I don't have that much time left. And the time that I have, I want to do projects that have something to say that will reach everyone. And theater is not that. So I'd rather do television than theater, but I love theater. It started in the 70s. There was a recession in the United States. The war was over. My then husband, Tom Hayden, and I wanted to start a statewide organization in California called the California Campaign for Economic Democracy. California is a huge state. It required a lot of money, and fundraising was getting very hard. So we thought I should start a business. And then I asked a very businessman that I knew who gave a great answer. Never go into a business you don't understand. Well, I don't understand a whole lot, but I know working out. So I started the workout. The organization owned the workout, and all the money went to the Campaign for Economic Democracy.
That's fantastic. We sadly have to leave it there just because
really
of your
have to
schedule.
go. All right. Thank you very much.
But can I just say
thank
thank you, Ms. Fonda.
Thank you so much.